Welcome to Get Bit Outdoors, your informative and how-to podcast with product reviews for hunting, shooting, and fishing. Primarily, the focus is Pacific Northwest based, with an emphasis on walleye waters, techniques, the Pacific Northwest Walleye Tournament Trail, big game hunting, and archery, bringing you all the information you need to get bit by your outdoor passion. So come on in and get bit. On this episode, we talk with Joe Okada, professional walleye fisherman and guide from Wisconsin. Joe tells us how he got started in the business. He gives us some great advice on lipless crankbait technique, as well as tips for trolling. He is a great guy full of passion for the sport of fishing, so come on in and give us a listen. Joe also wanted to give a shout out to Yamaha Outboard Motors for helping him achieve his dreams and goals. So how's things going?
Things are crazy busy right now. I'm actually leaving in the morning for the Aircraft and Bass Cat Dealer Conference down in Mountain Home, Arkansas, and looking forward to seeing what's new for 2017.
Yeah, I bet. How was ICAST?
ICAST is fun. It's nice to see people you don't get to see very often and shake hands with a lot of the friends that only come around once in a while. So it was a good time, but I'm happy to be home for a couple of days before I do a little 2-week road trip.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, between the tournaments, the ICAST, and all the other stuff, man, you just got to be running and gunning.
Yeah, pretty much live out of the suitcase during the summer. Well, and fall and winter, but it's all part of the game.
Sure. So, I just want to get a little bit of your background. You know, I did a little bit of reading on you. You know, I've obviously, like I said before, I followed you for a while. But for anybody that's listened, you know, they might not know your story or, you know, how you came about as far as being, I guess, a professional walleye fisherman is how I know you. First and foremost.
Did you Google Joe Okada? Because I think one of the first things that come up is like this samurai guy from Japan that's really awesome with a samurai sword.
I did see that. That's
so
funny.
That's not me.
Well, you could throw that in your list or your bag of tricks or whatever. You know, you go to one of your tournaments, you just show up like that.
Oh, yeah. Just call me the Walleye Ninja.
There you go. That's awesome. Yeah, so, give us a little background, you know, how you came about doing this.
Just a fishing nut, born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin. It goes back to the days where my dad and my grandpa would take me out to the middle of Lake Manoa, and we'd drift with hellgrammites or whatever, worms or whatever, and just drift across the basin and catch bluegills, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And I wanted to learn more, so little by little I picked up every bit of literature and video and every magazine, and just started immersing myself in the sport, and just the learning curve escalated from there. And that's probably the funnest thing about the whole sport is just the never-ending learning curve that as long as you keep applying yourself back to fishing, you're always learning, and that's probably the most rewarding part about the whole thing. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, because there's so many times, you know, I mean, you think you got it figured out, and it's going to throw you a curveball somewhere.
Sure does. Fish just being fish.
Yeah, no doubt.
But being able to anticipate, you know, whatever changes you're going to make throughout the day, or being able to anticipate how the bite's going to be before you even put your boat in the lake, you know, that just comes with a lot of time on the water, and just trying to build a really solid foundation of the whole sport itself. You know, from terminal to presentation and everything in between. There's so much that goes into it, and that's why I love this stuff.
Sure. Now, going back to your younger years, what was it that you guys focused on as far as fish goes?
Just panfish, really. We have a really cool set of lakes here in Madison. It's called the Yahara Lakes, or Yahara River chain of lakes. So there's 5 lakes, Mendota, Monona, Wabisa, and Kaganza, and Upper Mud Lake, and also Lower Mud Lake. And they're all loaded with fish, game fish from giant muskies down to the tiniest yellow perch, and there's always something fun to catch. There's always a lake that's happening. So it's a great place to build a foundation in fishing, just because there's so much to do and there's so many different ways to catch the fish around here. So it was a great place to grow up, and that's where I've spent most of my time fishing since I was young. Even started a guide service on the chain of lakes here right after high school, and have been just playing around in the fishing industry ever since. So that's where I started. That's where my roots are, and that's where I'm still fishing to this day.
Nice. Well, and that's so cool to be able to actually have that, being young, and then coming right out of school and being able to do that for a living. I mean, that's a lot of people's dreams, but
it's just a drive to really want to excel in it. Once I figured out that people were actually making a living in the fishing industry one way or another, and I saw that there was an opportunity, that's all I put my mind to.
Nice.
Even when I should have been studying harder in math class, I always had another notebook that I was drawing, the next carp break that I might try that weekend, or or a different planer board spread once I finally learned how to troll, or just my mind was constantly rolling through fishing, and it's everyone gravitates towards not everyone, but a lot of people gravitate towards something that they have interest in like that in life, whether it's BMX racing or golf or hockey or whatever. That was my thing, and it still is to this day, and that's. I don't see it changing anytime soon.
Well, it's good because you're still fairly young. I mean, you got a lot of years ahead of you.
I don't know about that. I just plucked a gray nose here the other day, so that puts me up there. I'm actually 34 years old now, but time sure has flown, that's for sure.
Sure, but still, I mean, okay, when you figure, you've been doing a lot of this stuff, let's say professionally since you came out of high school, but, I mean, you still got a lot of time left. So
I hope so. The walleye waters that we fish on aren't typically, nice to your body as a whole.
Right.
So, and I have noticed myself, maybe slowing down a few miles an hour over the rough stuff compared to maybe 10 years ago.
Sure.
But we still have all the right equipment to get us from point A to point B, and that sure makes life easier.
Oh, heck yeah. And everything that's coming out, they always make so many advancements to all that equipment, so who knows, in 10 years, man, you might be floating on a cushion of air.
I feel like it sometimes with my smooth move seats, but at the end of the day, when the waves are stacking up and you have many walls of water coming at you, a 20-foot boat is still a 20-foot boat. I don't care what brand you're running, you still have to behave and be smart about yourself out there.
Sure.
And don't push it too much, but that's what the walleye's like. They don't call it a walleye chop for nothing. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. We've been there. I know that we don't have the Great Lakes and some of the bigger waters that you have, but we've got a few reservoirs that, you get stuck out there and you better hang on because you're in for a hell of a ride.
That's for sure. I really like it when the waves are nice and tight. I'm running a Yarcraft 219 this year, and I've been running the 209 since 2012, and when the waves stack up really tight and you can still get up on top of them and run, it's still a lot of fun. I still smile when I get to run across the chops just right.
Right. Yeah, I know this year is the first year that I went to a 20-foot boat. I've always had an 18. And, there were times where, you even in that 18, you're just going, there's no way I can do this, But
there is. We find a way.
Well, yeah, you do, and then you pay for it later. But, going to that 20-foot, I mean, that was like a night and day. And you still get into waves where you're like going, okay, yeah, it's pretty hairy, but I tell you what, it sure makes a difference.
So your playground is way out west, I guess, you could say Fort Peck out west. Is that kind of your wheelhouse out there?
No, we're out in Washington, and actually where I'm at, I'm right smack dab in the middle of Washington, and I've got one of the premier walleye lakes about 2 minutes away from my door. And
sounds rough.
Yeah, no, it is. It's tough, and this is where I grew up. So, but we've got, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 lakes, and obviously the Columbia River. So yeah, we've got some good walleye water.
That's awesome. The Columbia River is definitely on my bucket list. I see pictures of some giants coming out of there. It doesn't really look like a walleye when they get that big.
I know.
I will hold a Columbia River giant at some point in my life before it's all over. I promise.
Well, yeah, you're more than welcome. Come on out. We'll show you. We've got some good areas. So, talking about, back in the younger days, what was like one of your fondest memories of maybe your first memory of being able to fish?
Oh, man. what's crazy is I remember so many of them, all the way down to what color, 2-inch white twisted tail I had while I was riding my bike to the railroad trestle.
Sure.
After school, and I can't remember somebody's name that I might have shook hands with yesterday at a show. Not that doesn't happen all the time, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
The short-term memory isn't there, but those memories are locked in so tight that I don't think even Alzheimer's can affect those memories. And I'd say one of them was, I would say going to this creek in the back of the high school I went to in Oregon High. There was this little creek. It has a nickname that I probably can't say in your podcast, but it's a sewage runoff treatment creek, and the carp were thick in there. Even some brown trout were in there too, but you would literally stalk individual carp underneath these mulberry bushes that were hanging in there. And if you didn't cast right, if you snuck up to the bank of the river, too quickly, you'd spook them out. And so you really had to be on your game to get these, little 3-4 pound carp to bite. And I just remember spending hours and hours and hours just trying to go after a couple fish that you might be stalking throughout the day. And it was so rewarding to catch those fish. And it actually turned me into a carp geek from that point on.
Really?
Which was a blessing in disguise, to be honest with you. If you look over in like the European fishing, carp are huge over there. Not just carp, but rockfish in general, roach and tench and all sorts of, and specimen fishing in general. People dedicate their lives to pursuing a single fish in a certain pond that may have been caught so many times that it's very weathered and it's very tough to catch. So they've come out with very technical rigging methods to catch and go after these specimens over there. And one of the first books I ever read and reread so many times was a book called Carp Fever by Kevin Maddox. And they were way ahead of their time in their rigging methods, very, very precise from the terminal end as far as how they would create a stealthy approach, reach long distances away from the bank because they're limited to the bank, which I was at the time too. And so it really gave me a good foundation of being very technical with your presentations to make the most out of your day on the water. And I've been able to apply a lot of those methods into walleye fishing, from that point forward. And that's really helped. Sometimes it makes me overthink things sometimes, but at the same time, the foundation that it built in terms of presentation especially has been really invaluable. So I think some of the carp fishing days I had back when I was a kid stuck on the bank are probably my fondest memories to date of fishing. And that's what really got me excited about the whole thing.
Sure. Well, it's funny you mentioned that because when I was younger, we obviously weren't that technical, but, we didn't have a boat, so we'd have to go down to the, shore, the dock, whatever, and my mom would take me down and drop me off, and I would spend hours at the lake, and she'd had dragged me out of there. But, a lot of the stuff that we were able to fish was carp. And, I'd just go down there with some little ultralight rod, a hook, and some bread. And I'd throw that bread ball on there and toss it out and let the carp come up and suck it down. And, we might catch 3 or 4 of those, but it's funny because in Moses Lake, you don't see small carp. If you see carp, they're going to be 10 to 50 pounds. And,
oh, man.
Yeah, it was a blast, and for a young kid, when you're catching fish that big on a little pole, it was just, that was fun.
Yeah.
So
the fight was the rewarding part, because you get to, it's kind of your reward for making a fish bite. I think the funnest part was the preparation before you even got to the lake, and then applying everything that you just read or learned, and having it, end with a hookup of a decent fish. And all of a sudden, it all came together, and it was like your pat on the back for doing something right. Even if it was just a carp, it's still a fish, to anybody,
right.
Especially a 12 or 13, 14-year-old.
Heck yeah.
And it's so rewarding, and you still get those little gratifying moments. Whether it doesn't matter what species of fish you're fishing for nowadays. If you're trying a new technique that might be the latest and greatest trending technique that you just figured out or learned how to apply in your home body of water, or anything like that, it's that's probably the most fun of the whole deal, don't you think?
Oh, heck yeah. I mean, there's no getting around that. I mean, when you figure something out that you want to go out and try, and you can catch the fish doing it by applying what you've, like you said, read, learned, something you've built. I mean, that in itself is, it's way up there as far as having satisfaction goes.
Yeah, especially when you get to add your own twist to the presentation.
Exactly.
I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head, but I'm drawing a blank. But when you hear something or want to try something out, and then say, well, there's got to be a better way. So you add your own little twist to it, and sure enough, it's actually working better than what you read about. You're like, holy cow, this I just struck gold. And then you try it the next day, and you don't catch anything, and you're back to square one. But,
right.
But that's just fishing.
Yeah. So how's your tournament season going so far? I'm doing some reading on it, but, just from your perspective.
Ups and downs. Thankfully, we've had a few tournaments on Green Bay, and that's a body of water that I have a soft spot in my heart for, and I've been able to do pretty well in a couple of those events. Just won the AIM Walleye Series tournament out of Little Sturgeon Bay a few weeks ago, and then had a top 10 at the NWT a couple days before that. So things were good there, and but then you backtrack even further to the Lake Winnebago tournament, which I don't have a sweet spot in my heart for, and I pretty much bombed there. But I can give you the classic. Oh, I was on in practice. I thought I was going to win, and then comes tournament day, and you really have nothing to show for it. And that's exactly what happened. I was on a really cool shallow water bite, just pulling crawler harnesses around in some really dirty, hot, shallow water. The fish were stacked in there, and come tournament day, they had flushed for some reason, and I can't tell you why. I don't have any good excuses. I just didn't catch them.
Yeah,
but,
that happens.
It was oh yeah. Yep. That's just a walleye being a walleye.
I know. Feels like you're banging your head against the wall sometimes.
Sure can. I think that happens with any fish, whether it's bass or walleye. But the cool thing about walleye is they're such a versatile fish. One day they might be in 2 feet of water, and the next day they might be 2 feet down over 80 feet of water.
Yeah.
And you just never know. But that's why we carry a lot of rods in our boat, and we just hope for the best for that day.
Sure. So how many of those tournaments do you fish a year?
This year it's going to be, I think, seven or eight. We used to do quite a bit more, but life and other commitments get in the way, and even the major circuits that we used to fish, back when FLW, I started just after the PWT went away, and the FLW was pretty much the only game in town for majors, and they were doing quite a few more events that year, for I think in 2008, 2009, and 10, and so we were doing probably a dozen or better tournaments back then. But now we're down to that number of tournaments, and that's okay because it's nice to spread them out a couple weeks apart so you can really prepare and catch back up on life in between events. And,
right.
It seems to be pacing itself pretty well.
Yeah, so we've got 6 out here that we do for our circuit, and that's up from what it used to be, because we used to have 2 separate tournaments. We had the Columbia River, that was its own circuit, and then we had kind of the lakes and reservoir. But they ended up combining them here, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, and made a really nice circuit. So you've got 3 of them. 3 of the events are on rivers, the other 3 are on lakes and reservoirs. So you got a nice diversity.
That's nice. How many boats are you typically drawing at those Western events?
It depends. It's kind of dropped a little bit. We used to have, because our maximum was 125, and if you didn't get your registration in a couple weeks ahead of time, you weren't going to get in. And now they're dropping anywhere between 60 to 80, which
it's still a good turnout.
Oh yeah, it's still good. I think we had one of them that was closer to 90 this year, and I think it's going to gain momentum now that we've got this new format. So they've got a true angler of the year for the circuit, where before the way they did it was kind of funky, but they went more to a traditional style angler of the year, and I think it's getting a lot more attention as far as not just local anglers, but ones from the region too. So
that's nice.
Yeah. So how that one you're talking about on Green Bay here a few weeks ago, you guys won that one by doing something a little different, didn't you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's different anymore. I mean, everybody's trying it. All these years when I was getting started on Green Bay, you just assumed you were going to troll because it's a giant body of water. The spots are really big, and the spot on the spot typically changes from day to day on where the fish set up based on water temperature, water currents, bait location, etc. So you pretty much just put the odds in your favor by casting 6 or 8 rods at a time and holding them in the perfect part of the water column for the most amount of time to be as efficient as possible. But recently, through the years, you start noticing fish showing up on smaller areas where you can still catch them trolling, but you might only be in the zone momentarily. So, it was just a matter of time before people were thinking, okay, why don't we just stop and cast to those prime spots and just milk those prime spots for the best we can and be efficient that way. And it has its pluses and minuses. If the fish aren't there, or if there's only 1 or 2 fish that are, holding up on that area, you really got to have a good milk run of spots to go hop around to. But yeah, casting is definitely playing a part in the tournament strategy on Green Bay moving forward. There'll never be another tournament where it probably doesn't have a time and place. It's definitely not the end all for sure. I mean, the last tournament that was just out there, I think the Masters Walleye Circuit, that was one trolling again. And that was after, I think, 99.9% of the field was trying to duplicate the pattern that we had going for the previous 2 tournaments.
Oh,
so,
really? Yeah.
Again, you can't count on it, being the winning tactic every time you go to Green Bay, but it has changed the way we look at spots. It's changed the way we fish the bay as a whole. And it's a really fun way to fish because, whether you're in 5 feet of water or 45 feet of water and you stick a, 6 or 10 pound fish on a spinning rod, it's pretty special, especially when you feel them whack it and just engulf the bait. And,
yeah.
That's a nice little change of pace. That's probably the most addicting part is just getting the strike and
feeling
and the fight's
that.
Just a bonus.
Yeah, feeling that tap. I mean, that's something that's really drawn me to casting. I mean, I've really switched my techniques where I've been doing a lot more of that the last few years, and I've been doing a lot of blade baiting, shiver minnows, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you too, was because you guys were using something. I know it's getting to be a little bit more popular as far as walleye fishing goes, but the rattle baits.
Yeah. Yep. The lipless crankbait bite is definitely a popular bite, especially on Green Bay. It works everywhere, though. I was just out west for the Montana Governor's Cup and even caught a few out there on them. So it doesn't matter where walleyes swim; they'll eat a lipless crankbait, and it's they'll eat it different ways. Whether you're jigging it off the bottom, or you're ripping it through cabbage, or you're just casting and burning over shallow flats. Fish love to eat those things, and they pretty much are always in my boat from now on, especially when I'm on Green Bay.
Yeah, I bet. So what is it that you guys are using for those? I mean, it's not just your standard rattle trap, right?
Rip and wraps are a pretty popular one. You're just looking for something with a decent fall rate so you can fish efficiently, but literally any rattle bait will work. And sometimes going to a rattle trap style is almost better because if they're looking for a little bit slower fall, where if you can't control the fall by the way you're stroking the bait, going to a little bit thicker profile lipless rattle bait will give you a slower fall, and that sometimes really helps trigger the bite, especially when they're only eating it on the fall. Sometimes they're picking it up right off the bottom. If that's the case, you can go to the heaviest, fastest fall rate one you can find and just fish fast, because most casts, unless you've landed them right on their head, is a fishless cast. For example, the last tournament I fished, that's one of the primary baits I was using, and we had 6 bites in 8 hours of fishing. So it's not like
Wow.
It's not like you just cast out and walleyes will come swimming from a mile away to come eat your bait. You have to pretty much hit them on the head or let that bait find its way into the nook and cranny where they're kind of holding up, and they just come out and chomp it. So,
Now,
but that is probably the most popular brand out there right now. But it's definitely not the only one that they're eating. That's for sure.
sure. Now, are you guys, I know you'd said something about, casting them up on the shallow flats and burning them through, but for what you guys are doing, for the most part, you're casting them out and kind of working them like a blade bait, aren't you?
Oh, you could literally cast that out and jig it, and then, or you cast the blade bait out and jig it and rip it just like you would a blade bait. Go and put on a blade or a lipless bait and fish it the exact same way, and you'll have, similar results. It's a really easy way to fish. There's no perfect way to fish it. Sometimes you want a fast retrieve where it's just a constant hop, making bottom contact every time. Sometimes, when you're fishing your shiver minnow, for example, you're not always letting it hit bottom. You're casting it out, getting it near bottom, swimming it a few times in a jigging motion, and then letting it, fall back to the bottom. And that's a pretty good way to fish the crankbait or the rattle baits too.
Sure.
You don't have to let it hit bottom every time. That's for sure. Sometimes it's just being near where they're holding up, and they'll come up and eat it. But if you have a really flat, calm day, typically I'll try to let it make bottom contact almost every time. I just try to let it find its way into the nooks and crannies. If you're fishing a wind-blown point, and those fish are out there and active, and they're feeding, maybe not necessarily chasing stuff along the bottom, you'll get outfished by the guys that aren't letting it hit bottom every time. So a lot of it's a mental count. You make your initial, as soon as it hits the water, you make your initial count to figure out how long it took to hit bottom, and then you just kind of get a rhythm going in your head so that you anticipate the bait hitting bottom, and just before it hits bottom, you're already stroking it again. You're not wasting that half a second to make bottom contact, reel down, and stroke it back up. And you'd be amazed that, if you're making several hundred casts a day and you're not letting it make bottom contact and catching up to it and then ripping it again, you'll cover a lot more water. So if that's what the fish are responding to, that's definitely the approach I like to make. But if they're not jumping all over it, I'll be a little more thorough and try to make bottom contact every time.
Sure, yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, that's good info. Just real quick, like for some of the people that may not understand or know what we're talking about, because I had somebody ask me this last time, hey, explain what bait you're talking about. So the lipless crankbaits, and that's just what it is. It looks like a crankbait, but there's no lip on it. It's weighted a little heavier so it falls a little faster. It's got rattles in it.
Yep, that's it. The bass guys love them, especially for, pre and post spawn largemouth when they're cruising some shallow flats with emerging weeds. They'll cast them out, make contact with a stalk of weeds and rip it free, and that's a triggering moment when they rip it free and then let it pause and let it fall. They'll get whacked right there.
Sure.
So it's a very similar reaction to walleyes, except you're fishing a little bit more thoroughly, maybe a little less aggressive, I guess, than you would be most of the time that you see the bass guys doing it. But even the bass guys are using those baits a lot on, what they call ledge fishing, if they're not using spoons or whatever else, deep cranks or whatever, they're utilizing those right along with their spoon programs a lot on the ledges now, and they're having really good success with those too.
Yeah, I kind of regret this year because we had a tournament up there on Banks, and we were pre-fishing. We were catching a lot of fish really shallow, and when I say that it was, let's say, between 3 to 7 feet deep, and that reservoir's got some really deep water in it. And I regret not trying those because it was one of those things after the fact. I thought, you know what, I should have put some of those on just to make them bite, because day two they were a little bit more, we had a hard time trying to find the fish we were on. And I knew they were there, they just weren't real aggressive. And I thought, well, after the fact, we should have went ahead and tried that just to see if we can get a reaction from them.
Oh yeah, that's you could come through with a jig and minnow and maybe not catch anything, but you can make them eat with something that's going to thump them on the head and then swim away from them quickly. They're either going to eat it or they're not. But I don't want your listeners to think that this is the end all bait that's going to make fish jump in their boat if they go out there and give it 4 hours and not a bite. I don't want them to say, oh, Joe's full of fish crap. So,
right.
But you just have to be persistent with it. You have to have a good day with it so you build some confidence in your cadence and how you were working it. And once you get some confidence in it, you can commit to it for several hours at a time without a bite. And then all of a sudden you find that one little feeding window or one little pocket of active fish, and you can get healthy pretty quickly out there with those things.
Well, sure, and that's what I talked to somebody else about, was the fact, the whole thing about confidence. And, a lot of people will go out, and when they're not catching fish, they'll decide to try a new technique, which is the wrong time to do that. You want to make sure you've got feeding fish, try the new technique, get the confidence in it, understand how to use it, and then when you get into your other situations, now you know what you're doing.
Exactly.
So
yeah, I'm going out to South Dakota in 2 weeks for a tournament, and I haven't been out there in 2 years. So guess what I'm going to put on to get bit first thing? Probably a bottom bouncer and a slow death hook.
Sure.
And then maybe I can start experimenting with stuff.
Well,
but, you just have to put something on that you're confident that those fish are going to eat if they're around. And if you find some active fish, then play around with the new presentation that you may not have confidence in, because at least in the back of your mind, you know the fish are there. You know that it's just a matter of you figuring out how to present that new technique or new bait the way those fish want it, and it lets you commit a little bit more time to it and lets you focus on the area just a little bit harder,
Sure, yeah. Well, and I'm glad you kind of went that direction because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've read and watched with you, you've been known as a person that does a lot of trolling, that's good at trolling. Is that sound about right?
Yeah, trolling is my bread and butter.
Sure.
Trolling for walleyes is still my problem. The most effective way for me to catch fish, because like I said before, you're literally casting a bunch of different baits at the exact same time to each spot. You're covering an enormous amount of water. You're focusing on the entire water column if need be, and as long as you have a system in place in your head to go through a process of elimination to figure out how to tweak your presentation to get bit the best, you can take subtle clues that you're getting from trolling and apply them across the entire spread and become way more productive, way faster than you could casting one lure to one little piece of structure at a time. So if I'm trolling 6 Berkeley flicker shads and scattered through the water column, maybe have 6 different colors on, or maybe have 2 different colors on, 3 of each staggered through the water column, and pick up one bite or get bit on a turn at a slower speed or something like that throws a clue in your head. What's just made that fish bite, or where was that fish located when it got bit? Okay, let me make an adjustment to the rest of my spread, and all of a sudden my catch rate goes from 1 fish an hour to 4.5 fish an hour. And you can't do that casting. And
right.
So I love the process of elimination. I love really focusing on every clue that the fish is giving me, whether I'm seeing clues on my electronics or it's in the process of actually catching fish. You're being able to make adjustments to your trolling spread is still the most effective way to consistently catch walleyes.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you were mentioning about going out there to South Dakota. It's been a while since you've been out there, so you're going to pop on that bottom walker, slow death, and a crawler. Is that what
do you call it?
A slow death?
No, what was the sinker? You call it a bottom walker?
Yeah, bottom walker.
Is that what all you guys out west call those things?
Yeah, we're crazy out here. We come up with all these weird names and stuff.
No, I'm just kidding. I haven't heard anybody call it a bottom walker in ages, but that's exactly what they are. I call them a bottom bouncer, or just call them bouncers. But
sure.
Tomato. That's funny. Anyways, I interrupted you. Now, what were you saying?
No, that's funny though, because I guess maybe I'm dating myself, because that's how long it's been. I've been fishing for walleye, since I can remember. And that was what we did. I mean, you put on the bottom walker, and at that time it was a wedding ring, because we didn't really have anything else or know any better. And that's what we would troll. We'd troll for hours with those things. But switching with you, so is that your go-to if you're going to water you haven't been to for a while, new water? You're going with
No, it depends on the body of water. Typically on Lake Oahe, you can roll up to, you're a fish hunter on Lake Oahe. You literally drive around till you see fish, and if there's a pot of fish stacked up on a little point, you can usually roll through there with a little piece of night crawler and a bottom bouncer and get bit, just to identify that they're for sure walleyes, B, that they're active fish, and then you can start trying to play around with, does a bigger fish want a spinner? Is it time to put out some lead core and troll crankbaits for a bigger bite, or am I getting the bigger bites that I need on this little piece of worm? But to get that first bite up there, I can promise you that's what I'm going to have up first, just to get the ball rolling. And but that's different. On Lake Erie, it's either going to be like a reef runner, a husky jerk, or a big gaudy crawler harness, depending on the water temperature. But each body of water has its own little go-to that I have a lot of confidence in, and that's usually how I set the tone for my practice days. Is just by going with something that's worked really well in the past to catch the fish that I feel should be around the area, and then I can start playing.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, and you mentioned about on some of the lakes using a big gaudy spinner. I mean, what's the largest size you'll go to in something like that?
Number 8, Indiana. It's probably the biggest I'll go. There's usually, I don't want to make generalizations, but usually you don't need to go any bigger. I can promise you bigger would work a lot of times, but you can only have so many boxes of blades in your boat at a time. And going back to when we talked about maybe overthinking things sometimes, one of the best open water trollers in the country is his name is John Gilman, and he keeps he's one of the best spinner fishermen you'll ever meet. You should interview the guy sometime. Maybe he'll give away some secrets. I'll listen to your podcast.
There you go.
And he keeps it very simple. He just has one box full of some confidence blades that he's done really well with, that walleyes like to eat. He has some very simple bead patterns that seem to always work if the walleyes are there and the walleyes are eating. And he just goes out and uses them and catches them. He worries more about fine-tuning his the other part of his presentation, from boat control to speed and depth and just the way his lures are running, versus, do I have a purple bead in between these two chartreuse beads, or, oh shoot, I'm missing a gold bead on the front, or I need to get that little orange focus bead on the very front of the upper blade. He doesn't worry about that, and he still kicks our butts a lot of times. So
nice.
There's something to be said with sticking to a simple foundation for baits and just making sure you're fishing the best that you can, and that's a lot of times that's the winning combination.
Well, yeah, because a lot of people, when you're talking about the boat control and fine-tuning what you're doing as far as the trolling method goes, a lot of times, it can depend on color, depending on water clarity and things like that, but, there's so much of that people ignore as far as boat control, speed, what your lure's doing, not necessarily what it looks like as far as color goes. I've seen a lot of people that they'll buy these slow death rigs, and not that you can really completely fish them wrong, but they'll put this huge crawler on there and it's not spinning like it's supposed to, so it's not getting the action that a lot of times is going to trigger a bite. But they're more worried about the color of it than what the action of the lure is.
Exactly. And before they had slow death, what did people use? They just used a simple Aberdeen hook that didn't even spin, and they just put a piece of crawler around, and walleye still ate it.
Right.
So a lot of times we're overthinking the small things like that, but sometimes it's the small things that matter.
Sure.
For example, sharp hooks. A lot of people don't take the time to run their finger across their hook and feel if there's just a little bit of a burr coming off that point that may affect penetration, and if that takes away 1 or 2 bites a day for you over the course of a year, that's a lot of missed opportunities for good fish in the boat,
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
Maybe instead of worrying about if you're missing that blue or purple stripe on your crankbait, worry about if you got the right components on that thing to get the fish in the boat.
Sure.
It's just, there's so many little things, and I'm a total geek about all of that stuff. The night before a tournament, I'd probably sit in my boat later than 90% of the field, making sure that all my bases are covered. All my bases are covered for Plan B and Plan C, and just being completely prepared for every situation that comes up is probably one thing that I take a lot of pride in before I prepare for an event.
Yeah, I bet. Well, and for you guys, I mean, that stuff, that's your bread and butter. I mean, that's your life right there. For some of us that are fishing these smaller circuits, oh yeah, of course you want to win, but I mean, you've got to pay attention to that. I mean, everybody does. I guess I'm kind of talking in circles there, but one of the things that drew me to you, and like I said, I followed you for a while, but years ago I saw a video on YouTube, and you were explaining how you go about quick change as far as spinners go, as far as the beads, floats, things like that. And I thought it was really cool, and I don't know if you still do it or not, but you just had a box with some fine wire that had your setups that were already made. And then when you wanted to change, you just slip them on, pull the old ones off, slip the new ones on. You didn't have to worry about retying, taking out a whole new lure. Is that something you still do?
For sure. Unfortunately, we don't have a crystal ball to know if those fish are going to eat a purple and gold harness or if they're going to gravitate towards the blue and red harness the next day. So I'll just have one roll of pre-tied leads ready to go on a water noodle. And I think you said wire, but I actually use 30-pound monofilament.
Oh, okay, that's what it was.
To thread up through the beads, and I use 6mm beads for the most part from JT Custom Tackle, and the diameter of 30-pound test is pretty key because if you use anything less than 30-pound test, the diameter is a little too small, and when you double up the line through those beads, they have a tendency to fall through that loop, and then you have all you have is a tackle box full of loose beads, and that was a waste of a TV show in the winter when you were prepping all that stuff. So
right.
Basically, you want to have that thicker diameter line, thread on the beads that you want, thread on your clevis, and then tie an overhand knot on the two tag ends, where it was doubled up through the line. And then when it comes time to needing a fresh harness or changing colors or anything you want, simply run the spare lead through the loop that you created in there and slip the beads off, and you're back in business. Put a blade on and you're good to go. It's hard to explain over the phone here, but maybe you can put a link to it or something on your podcast and people can see it. But it's pretty easy once you see it done in person.
Sure. No, and that was one of the things. I mean, it changed a lot of stuff I did in my boat at the time because I used to have, I think, 2 boxes full of pre-tied lures that were in every color with every blade you can think of. And, when I switched to that, I had one small box that had all my combinations in it, and then your roll of leads. So,
do you tell me I had a positive influence on your fishing workflow?
You better believe it.
I feel so good now. Thanks. No, that's great. I'm really happy to hear that. That's why I put that stuff up there, and I just like it. It helped one person out for sure, so that's good enough for me.
Heck yeah. Any other little tidbits you want to share with that as far as little secrets? Yeah, I didn't
pretty
think
much
so.
out of secrets. I don't have any secrets. I just fish harder than a lot of people.
Sure.
And again, get lucky once in a while. So that's all there is to it. Just I love being prepared. I love sitting in the garage preparing for an event just as much as I do actually going and fishing it. It sounds crazy, but it just puts my mind in a happy place and gives me an excuse not to, do regular life stuff for a few hours here and there. So
yeah, exactly.
But no, that's one of many things that I like to do to try to stay more efficient in the boat. And efficiency is key. If you can enhance your fishing, give yourself 3 to 5 minutes of more productivity throughout each fishing day because of something that you did in preparation for that day. You multiply that over how many days a year you fish, and all of a sudden you just added another day of fishing to your calendar year.
Oh yeah.
Without even trying.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. I like that
just
thought.
Doing the math.
Hey, what are your thoughts on the no coal?
Oh man, I am not a fan. That's something that every walleye fisherman will gripe about, and some will say the argument, oh, everyone's playing under the same rules, so it doesn't matter. But it does matter. It really does. That no call rule handcuffs who gets to showcase who was the best fisherman for that particular day.
Sure.
So do slot limits, and everybody will tell you that. And that's why I find myself gravitating towards these catch and release tournaments more and more, like the AIM tournament where we just that we were lucky enough to win the other day. In a no call tournament, I would have come in short. I would have lost that tournament. But thankfully, it was a catch and release tournament. So at the end of the day, I just marked down the 5 biggest ones that I caught, and it was the 5 best ones of the day out of anybody. So it was good enough to
right.
pay off the credit card.
So is there thoughts on that whole no call? Because I got to be honest with you, I haven't done my homework good enough on this. But is it just because of the mortality rate?
Yeah, it's to protect the fishery, of course. It has nothing to do with trying to handcuff the fishermen or handicap the fishermen by any means. It's just it's the rule determined organizations have to play by because of the local regulations that are in place, so that even the resident fishermen that fish on a daily basis aren't upgrading fish throughout the day of fishing when their live well water is 85 degrees and the fish are probably not going to make it anyways. So if you're going to, I guess it's just a way to limit mortality, limit the overall fish kill for each event, and just keep everybody happy. So from that regards, it's a good thing, but it sure doesn't allow tournament anglers to showcase a fishery for one thing, because you're not actually weighing in the 5 biggest fish you may catch throughout the day unless you catch them in perfect order. You know, the first 5 fish of the day that you keep were just happen to be the biggest ones that you were going to catch all day, which is never the case. And when it is, you count your blessings and you go in for an early lunch. But most of the time it's not, and you have to make, really painful decisions. How many times have you gone out in the day and you're off to a good start, so you're throwing some fish back, and then all of a sudden at 10 o'clock the fish shut off, and you come in with 2 fish. Right. And you could have come in with the limit after the first hour. It sucks, plain and simple. But it's like other people say, we all play by the same rules, and we're thankful to have a playground to play on. So it is what it is.
Right. Well, what about going to a system like they have with Major League Fishing, where all that stuff's recorded instantly?
Yep, I love it.
Yeah,
I love it, and I'd love to be able to see what the competition is doing. If that just throws another loop into the strategy as you play out throughout the day. If you're out there grinding away for a few key bites, and other people in the first half hour already have 15 pounds in the live well, maybe it's time to go to your nursery and get healthy real quick before you go trying to hope for 2 or 3 bites for the rest of the day. It would be a lot of fun to see live updates from how my competition is faring for that day, so I know whether I should either commit to the presentation I'm currently doing, or switch it up so I can play catch up, or maybe sustain a position that I'm currently in, or anything like that. I love that format. I just think it's I don't think some of our events are quite there yet logistically, and it would create quite a bit of extra overhead for those organizations to run correctly. So
sure, it would.
Right now, we have the AIM system where you catch a fish, photograph it, and release it, and they have a very foolproof way of protecting that system. And at the end of the day, you're also subject to a random polygraph test as well. So I think it's probably the most level playing field we have to play on to date.
Wow, yeah, I didn't know about the polygraph thing, but that is pretty cool.
I wish they'd do it for every event. I mean, I'm not saying people are cheating, but then they'd be able to have, if everybody was subject to a polygraph test at the end of an event, which probably won't ever happen, but you'd be able to integrate so many other cool aspects into the game to make it more entertaining for the fan base watching the events.
Right.
And by if there's a no communication rule or something like that. Well, if you're subject to a polygraph test at the end of the event, and you were able to, give updates to people watching you fish throughout the day or something like that using your mobile phone, I mean, how cool would that be to get more people engaged in what we're doing? We all get to tune in to watch Tiger Woods swing a golf club all day.
Yeah.
It'd be cool to watch us, reeling fish throughout the day too.
And I shouldn't say maybe everybody, but at this day and age, it seems like everybody's got a smartphone and you got an app for everything. So I don't think it would be that difficult to be able to get something so that it was all connected.
Right.
But
I just want the magic app where I can plug in the conditions for the day, and it without fail will tell me what I should be doing, how I should be doing it, and I'll have guaranteed success for that. I'm going to develop that app, and then I'll be able to retire early.
I was going to say you'll never have to work another day in your life.
Man, I'm on it. As soon as we get off this phone, I'm going to call my brother. He's a computer geek out in Colorado, and he's if anybody can make that application, he can.
There you go.
Just kidding.
Oh, that's funny. So, had you on for a while. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but one cool thing I thought when I was reading about you was the fact that you started fishing tournaments with your dad as a team. I know that as far as it goes, it's kind of near and dear to me because that's what I've always done. My dad and I have always fished the tournaments together, and early on it was him teaching me, but as it went on, of course, now the teacher became the student because of all the new stuff we've learned. But, I just thought that was pretty cool you did that with your dad.
You were asking me what my favorite moment in fishing was. Just some really cool memories as a kid and all that good stuff. But when it all came together in 2012 and I was able to win a 3-day event with him, it was my first win, first major win. And I was able to share the stage with Dad. Probably one of the coolest moments in my whole life. So
Awesome.
There's no substitute, I'll never be able to repay my parents for the amount of support they've given me and encouragement throughout the years, and I owe it all to them for sure. No questions asked. So when I was able to, give my dad a big hug on stage and share, some winning fish catches with him on that third day, oh man, I got goosebumps on my arm right now just thinking about that. It's a day I'll never forget.
Hey, amen to that, brother. Just one time I want to be able to give that to my dad. We've come close, but we just haven't been able to get the win, and one of these days we're going to.
But you know what? It's the amount of times that you have to try before it finally pays off that makes it even that much more special. I fished with Dad since 2000. Yeah, I must have been 7 years I fished with Dad in NWC and AIM tournaments, and we had some major lows, major highs, really cool moments, down to the time when I knocked father-son team of the year fish off with the net for Dad once, and felt about 2 inches tall at that point. But all that stuff accumulates, and finally when it comes together, it is the coolest feeling in the world. And unfortunately, Dad gets to retire this year, and he's moving down to Florida. So, hopefully I still have a pre-fishing partner during the summer if he wants to fly up here and fish with me. But
there you go.
I'm losing my favorite tournament partner this year to the sunny state of Florida. So I got to find a way to get him back up here strategically throughout the year to get him in the boat.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, Joe. Well, I've kept you long enough. I really appreciate you coming on the show and taking some time with us, sharing some of the stuff that you did, and great success to you for the rest of the year. And hopefully we can have you on again.
Anytime, man. I'm here. You're only a phone call away.
Thanks for listening to Get Bit Outdoors Podcast. Check us out on Facebook at Get Bit Outdoors Podcast, Twitter at Get_Bit Outdoors, and you can get us on iTunes and Stitcher. Leave us a rating and a comment on the show. We love the feedback. Thanks to Fish Face Goods, FX Custom Rods, Cinetic Reels, Max Lures, Yakima Valley Marine, and Slimers. Jenna Waller joins me next week to talk about how she got started in the business, getting kids involved outdoors, her past hunts, wishes for warriors, and a whole lot more. Thanks for listening to Get Bit Outdoors. I'm your host, Lonnie Craighead, and if you enjoyed this podcast, check out Archery Maniacs with Zach Harold.